glad that you've joined us for this next session. You know, Maya Angelou is one of my favorite American poets. One of the things she said is, I've learned that people will forget what you say, people will forget what you do, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And as leaders, we are responsible for making sure that our people do feel heard, do feel included, and do feel part of what's happening within the organization. And so I am honored today to introduce you to our next speaker, Sarah Jones, who is the founder and CEO of Inclusion Pro. And Sarah actually is also working with us as we start our D&I program. So we're so honored to be with her, to have her here with us today. And I am happy to turn it over to Sarah as she speaks to how to lead with inclusivity.
Thank you, Shirley, and welcome everyone. Good morning. My name is Sarah Jones, and I am the CEO of Inclusion Pro. And I'm thrilled to be here with you today to talk about leading with inclusion. As I've worked with Children's Miracle Network hospitals, I'm struck with how amazing the Dance Marathon program is. It's truly inspiring to see thousands of college students across the nation raising millions of dollars to change children's lives. And as far as nonprofit work goes, this is the best of both worlds. Not only are you fundraising for a good cause, but you're also fundraising in the best way possible. What a fun program to be part of, and I can understand why thousands of college students want to be part of Dance Marathon. Now, we're living in a unique time. This conference has innovated to get thousands of student leaders virtually connected from across the nation. I know before you would all be together in person. We are each experiencing history in a major way. There's literally been no other time like this. Many of us are living through our first global pandemic, and as we've had to socially distance, we found ways to work together and to seek connection with each other differently than before. Sadly, many of us have lost loved ones, and even if we haven't, it's daunting to not only have to be careful of our own health, but also to be socially responsible for the health of others. Many of us are also experiencing for the first time massive social unrest because of racial injustice. We should all be asking ourselves, how can we be more anti-racist and become better allies to our Black friends and the Black community? Both the pandemic and racial injustice have happened on a global scale. We share common experiences now with people across the world. But these events have also created immense international divides. There's never been a time when we have needed more humanity and more understanding. And even though you're watching remotely, our shared experiences remind us that we are not alone and that every human deserves to be physically and emotionally safe. So let's take a moment to reflect. What's one thing that you've learned about yourself these past few months? Has something changed for you? Or is there a new aspect of your personality that has surfaced in the past few months? Please post your thoughts on Discord in the Building a Movement channel. It will be enlightening for all of you to see how these past few months have changed us as individuals and made us more aware of ourselves. So while you're sharing, I'll share a little bit of mine. As you can tell, I'm an extreme extrovert, and having to socially distance has been really hard for me. At least at first it was. And I came to appreciate how an introvert might see the world. I've appreciated having fewer distractions, more routine, and I'm actually really enjoying it, surprised that I'm enjoying it. So thank you everyone for sharing something that you've learned about yourself on Discord, or if you're taking notes, jot notes in a reflection journal. I hope that through this workshop that you'll all learn a lot about each other. So a little bit about me. I was born in South Korea. When I was 3 years old, I was adopted by a family in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I arrived in America with a mysterious tattoo on my left forearm. In this photo, you can see the shape of that tattoo that's drawn on my arm. My parents actually had the tattoo removed after I came to America because they didn't want other kids making fun of it. So I redrew the tattoo on my arm for this photo, and I recently shared my adoption story on TED, which was released just a few weeks ago. So that's all I'm going to tell you about my adoption story. I don't want to give too much away. You can go to TED.com to hear the rest of my story. So I'm going to leave you with that little cliffhanger. I grew up in Utah, and I was fortunate enough to get an engineering degree from the University of Utah and a law degree from Brigham Young University Law School. And with these 2 degrees, I became a patent attorney, and I practiced law for 10 years. During that time, I founded a nonprofit for women in STEM, and then I left my law career and I became a tech entrepreneur. And after a while, I became a tech CEO, and currently, I consult executives and leaders on inclusion and diversity. So you can see that my career has taken quite a few twists and turns. And I know sometimes in college, it's hard to see all of the stepping stones that you will take in the future. I just want to reassure you that you do not have to have everything figured out right now. In fact, the nonprofit that I started while I was in law school was actually one of the things that encouraged me to branch out from being a lawyer. The nonprofit is called Women Tech Council, and I started it 13 years ago. Back then, there were only a few women in STEM degrees and working in the tech fields. I was practicing patent law and writing a lot of software patents, and there weren't a lot of women in my field. So Women Tech Council was the way that I networked with other women professionals and women in technology. One of the programs that we've been able to build is called She Tech. This program exposes high school girls to many different careers in tech. And as you know, tech is everywhere. So we want to help high school girls see that technology can connect with anything that they're passionate about. Over 15,000 high school girls have attended She Tech over the years, and it's been truly inspiring to see thousands of high school girls get excited about careers in technology. But I have to tell you, when I was a lawyer, I didn't fully understand my whole skill set. I actually thought that I was only good at practicing law. And as I worked in this nonprofit, I started to see and exercise a lot of different skills that I didn't know that I had. I also met a lot of other women professionals with amazing skills. And I realized that there was a lot more that I could do with my career. And that's what actually inspired me to leap from my career in law to other interesting career roles. So I have a soft spot for nonprofits because they are a special place to learn unique skills and a great training ground. As you've been working on Dance Marathon, I bet you've learned a new skill as well. So I'm going to walk you through a thinking exercise about your experience with Dance Marathon. The first thing that I want you to do is reflect on what skills you have learned because of working on Dance Marathon. Perhaps something you didn't realize that you knew how to do well, or a skill that you've been able to sharpen. What is that new skill? And chat about it on Discord. I'll give you a moment to do that. Okay, the next thing I want you to think about is learning. What skills do you want to learn? Perhaps you'd like to contribute to a particular area of Dance Marathon. Maybe you've seen other people use a certain skill and you'd love an opportunity to do that. So take a moment to hop over to Discord and share a skill that you would like to learn. Okay, and the last part of this thinking exercise is impact. Ask yourself, how have I contributed to the success of Dance Marathon? If you think beyond just fundraising, what are ways that you've been able to contribute to its success? I'll give you a moment to think and share a thought on Discord. Okay, thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I mentioned earlier that the nonprofit that I founded actually taught me a lot of skills that I didn't know that I had. It was by growing this nonprofit from literally nothing into an organization of over 10,000 people that I realized I had actually gained a wealth of skills that I wouldn't necessarily have learned by just practicing law. And I was able to use these skills in my other career roles to become a better leader. So I'm a firm believer that when you're working in a nonprofit, you aren't just giving to charity. You're actually learning and applying skills to make a project successful. I took a moment to list the skills I learned in building my nonprofit, and I wanted to share them with you. So when you look at this list, you might see a skill that you've already shared on Discord. So great that you recognized it as a skill. And you should feel free to go back to this list as you consider your college experiences. Now, every single one of these skills that I've listed here is a practical business skill. So you can literally take any of these skills that you're learning and put them on your job resume because they're real skills that businesses are actually looking for. So in addition to business skills, a good leader is always learning leadership skills. It's a lifelong process, and inclusion skills are leadership skills. In fact, as you progress more and more into leadership, you'll realize that inclusion skills are what set apart an amazing leader from an average leader. At Dance Marathon Leadership Conference, you learn to use the idea skills to make sure the Dance Marathon is a great experience for everyone who's participating. So as a review, the idea skills are inclusion, diversity, equity, and access. And today I'm going to dive deeper into the concepts of inclusion and diversity from the idea skills. Even though they seem simple to understand, even experienced leaders sometimes get these terms confused. Some people think that inclusion and diversity mean the same behavior when they have very different meanings. So to illustrate, here are some common things that happen when you're interacting with different people. So I'm going to give you some examples that are specific to a college setting. When someone is new in joining a college group, we sometimes assume that they're automatically being welcomed and included, but there are many ways that we sometimes treat a person or group differently without even realizing it. So let's work through these examples. For example, when you meet a student from a different group on campus, you might assume that that person is an outsider. Or when someone is from a different college department, do you assume that they have a certain personality stereotype? Or when you meet someone from a different country, you might assume that they're less fluent in English. Or you might meet someone who has children or childcare responsibilities, and you might assume that they're less committed to their college experience. So notice when we put characteristics that make people interesting, different, or unique on the left, we can separate the behavior that happens based on that characteristic on the right. This is the difference between diversity and inclusion. Diversity is the characteristic that makes them unique, but inclusion or invalidation is how we treat them. I believe the opposite of inclusion is actually invalidation. Invalidation includes all the ways that we unintentionally or intentionally treat people to make them feel like their opinion or what they have to give isn't as valuable as ours. So let's define both diversity and inclusion. Diversity involves identifying characteristics in people. Many of these categories and characteristics are external, but some can also be internal. Our brains are always working to try to categorize people, and most of the time we don't even realize that we are doing this. So when we talk about the need for diversity on our campuses, in our student groups, and in our workplaces, we're really focusing on identifying different characteristics in people. But the truth is that diversity alone does not create inclusion. You can have a group of people with diverse characteristics in a room, but that does not mean that they're actually being inclusive with one another. On the other hand, we have inclusion. The definition of inclusion is engaging people. Inclusion is inviting and asking others for their contributions. I notice that you don't have to have a diverse group of people to have inclusion. We've all seen groups where people with similar characteristics get together and they get along phenomenally. They're laughing, joking, debating one another, exchanging ideas, giving each other the benefit of the doubt. They're being highly inclusive with each other. So another truth is that inclusion is easier between like-minded people. People who have similar characteristics are often able to connect with each other more easily than people who have diverse characteristics. So I'd like to map out inclusion and diversity to give you a productive way to think about these two behaviors. Remember that inclusion and diversity are not the same. If you put inclusion on one axis and diversity on an opposing axis, we can map out some interesting behaviors that happen within groups. You can measure a group's performance from low performance to high performance based on how much inclusion and diversity they are exhibiting. A very common performance line could look like this. This line illustrates a minimal amount of effort to be inclusive. So using my highlighter, I'm going to illustrate on the left here. You can have a group with low diversity but high inclusion. Again, remember, you don't have to have a highly diverse group to highly engage one another. Inclusive teams like this form all the time. And with little diversity, they can perform quite well. So this group right here is actually performing quite well together. Now, as more diverse individuals join the group, you notice that the performance can go down. What's happening here? Well, you sometimes have what's called the tokenized minority effect. So this is where someone in the group feels isolated, different, or invalidated. So remember, the opposite of inclusion is invalidation. Also, the team doesn't realize that the person is feeling this way and may unconsciously be making that person feel invalidated. So the performance dip means that all team members in the group are not feeling as if they can contribute at their highest levels. Now, as you increase diversity within the group, say we add a few more people to the group with diverse characteristics, you can sometimes reduce the feeling of isolation or have enough people that it feels okay to talk about a diversity of ideas. So as you add more diversity to the group, invalidating behavior can reduce and the group can achieve higher performance. Now, a better approach to being more intentional about inclusion looks like this. With intentional effort, you can add more diversity to a group while intentionally overcoming that performance dip. People don't have to go through the experience of feeling tokenized or isolated or invalidated when they join a new team. They can feel their ideas are valued even if they present a different idea than the rest of the team. Another way that I like to explain this particular graph is that there's an awesome zone where everyone is exhibiting a high level of inclusion, and there is a not awesome zone when sometimes people feel invalidated or less included. We all want to believe that we are in this awesome zone up here. When it comes to treating people, but the hard truth is that we all have blind spots. And we sometimes invalidate people without even realizing it. I know that a lot of us would feel really badly if we actually knew that someone felt that way because of something that we said or did. If we can learn to understand our blind spots, we can become more intentional and conscious about treating everyone in the awesome zone. Racism is an example where we across the board have not been awesome. All of us need to learn more and recognize how we can contribute to anti-racism and change to be anti-racist. We never want to cause anyone to feel invalidated because of their race. But staying in the awesome zone takes work and learning a new set of behaviors. When we're in the awesome zone, inclusion and diversity work together, and it looks different than just inclusion by itself or diversity by itself. So what does it look like when you combine inclusion and diversity together? I want you to imagine that you have the color red, which represents inclusion, and the color blue, which represents diversity. And you combine them together to create a new color, purple. When you bring both inclusion and diversity together, it's a new set of behaviors. It doesn't look like just inclusion by itself or diversity by itself. Purple represents inclusive leadership. A phrase I like to use to describe inclusive leadership is lead with inclusion, value diversity. Inclusive leadership combines the best parts of what it means to have a diverse group and the best parts of engaging everyone in that group. So let's envision how an inclusive leader leads. An inclusive leader focuses on human connection and diversity of ideas. Notice here that an inclusive leader doesn't overly focus on someone's external characteristics. They focus more on the perspectives that someone brings when they are informed by their life experiences. Next, an inclusive leader is willing to challenge their own bias. These are the blind spots that were illustrated in the previous chart. All of us have biases because of the ways that we were raised and our unique circumstances. So an inclusive leader is willing to acknowledge that they might be wrong and be willing to have their assumptions tested and even change their minds. They actually seek out ideas that are different from theirs because they love learning about diverse perspectives. And finally, an inclusive leader collaborates on common values across communities. An inclusive leader knows that even if you have someone who appears on the outside to be different, shared human values exist across all communities. And they're willing to recognize these values and connect through these values rather than focus on differences. An inclusive leader doesn't forget about diversity. They're not colorblind and they're not gender blind. They actually value the different aspects that each person brings to the table. Diversity as a concept is actually quite multidimensional, and oftentimes we get focused on just a few diversity characteristics. So I'm going to show you a chart of many different diversity characteristics, and you'll see that there's actually many, many different ways that human beings can be different from each other. And collectively, all of these diversity characteristics create millions of fascinating combinations in humans. No wonder there are no two humans that are exactly alike. So as you looked at that list, I would love for you to reflect and then share in Discord, what is one area of uniqueness that you bring to Dance Marathon? Feel free to share that on Discord, but make sure that you're comfortable sharing that. I don't want anyone to feel that they need to share anything that makes them feel uncomfortable. And while you're sharing, I'll show you the list again so you can see the diversity characteristics. And keep sharing on Discord. While you do that, I'm going to share with you that I already shared that I'm an international adoptee. And in communities where I grew up, I was usually one of few Asians. And being raised in a white family made me unique, even from other Asians who were raised by Asian families. So another way that I'm unique also is I'm fluent in Spanish, not in an Asian language like you might think, right? So we all have unique characteristics that we bring to the table. Wonderful, thank you so much for sharing on Discord. Let's move on. So I want to emphasize that I believe college students are in a particularly special situation where inclusion feels a bit more natural. Because college students are focused on learning, your minds are more naturally open to hearing new ideas and exploring learning opportunities. I find that college students are generally very open-minded. You generally value connection and authenticity. You're constantly using critical thinking skills and often separating fact from fiction. So connecting and authenticity are very valuable to you. Also, because you're in an environment where different people come from different geographic locations, you're surrounded by a lot more diversity. You're literally and virtually now colliding with people from all walks of life. And diversity is a norm in college settings, much more than other areas of life. College campuses also tend to be places where freedom of thought is highly valued. Topics like racism, mental health, and political issues are widely discussed. College students tend to want to talk about real issues. And especially in younger generations, racial diversity isn't as unique as it might feel to older generations. The mixed race category is growing at a rate of 3 times the rate of any other racial category in the United States. So the concept of race is quite a bit more fluid than it was in previous generations. And again, college campuses tend to attract a lot of national and international diversity. So college students, I like to say that they're inclusion natives, and inclusive leadership behaviors are something that come more naturally to you during this phase of life. And as inclusion natives, sometimes we automatically assume that we're being inclusive. Most of us are friendly and kind to others. But if we look around, you might notice that your dance marathon group might be somewhat homogenous. Maybe it's maybe based on ethnicity, gender, age, people from the same major or club on campus. So it's worth asking yourself, like good leaders do, are you being inclusive? And do you value diversity? The best leaders that I know are willing to get feedback, and they're always trying to improve to become better. Some ways that you can get feedback are by asking current participants about their experience with your dance marathon group. You can also ask past participants what it was like to participate in dance marathon. You might also try to find out why some people decided not to participate in dance marathon. What's the reputation of your group on campus? Remember, getting feedback can sometimes feel uncomfortable, but the best leaders power through this feeling and they keep asking for feedback. And most importantly, they do something about it when they get feedback. Here are 4 tips on how you can be an inclusive leader now. I'm a big believer that if you start early building leadership skills, they will always benefit you in your future career. Many of these skills I learned the hard way, so hopefully this will help you get a head start on your leadership skills. First, look beyond your immediate network. The best leaders are always looking out for interesting people that they want to meet. They're not held back by ties to a particular group. They're willing to stretch and to look beyond their immediate circle to build bridges of friendships. Second, value the people that you work with. This also includes valuing diverse experiences that they bring. Every person has a unique life story and a unique way of looking at the world. Instead of seeing certain characteristics as a challenge, see them as a learning opportunity. Third, value ideas, particularly the ideas that challenge you. The best leaders are able to hear a wide range of ideas and not feel threatened. An inclusive leader actually expects to hear different ideas. They know if they aren't hearing different ideas, then they aren't leading people to express their best thinking. Finally, lift others up. Inviting others to contribute to Dance Marathon is a way to extend the opportunity to learn the same skills that you are learning. Encourage those in your Dance Marathon team to practice new skills and to stretch in ways that might feel uncomfortable. Now, one innovative way that you might practice these 4 inclusive leadership skills is to join another student group beyond your Dance Marathon group. Choose a group that is different from you in some way, but presents an interesting learning opportunity. As you work with that group, find ways to be an active participant. There's no better way to build relationships than to actually work with people. As you get to know people in that group, they will trust you and share their ideas. And as you hear ideas that are different from yours, instead of trying to prove that you are right, consider the source of other ideas. What about that person's life influenced them to arrive at that idea? College is an amazing opportunity to share different perspectives where it's just about learning. And then finally, share these opportunities with your new friends. Perhaps it's an opportunity to participate in Dance Marathon or on another project. People always appreciate when you think of them for a great opportunity, and good leaders are always looking for ways to lift others up. So I am still using these very same skills. I want to tell you about a project I worked on where I really focused on being intentional about leading with inclusion and valuing diversity. This is a photo of a group of consultants in Utah. Before this project, we had never worked with each other. I got to know these leaders and I thought they would be super interesting to collaborate with on a new way to deliver diversity and inclusion training to companies. So we did an experiment and created an innovative training program that we called Inclusion X Project. Now, at first glance, you might look at our group and assume that we're just a group of people of color. Yes, we do have different ethnicities. There is Asian, Black, Hispanic, Hawaiian, Filipino, and white represented in this group. But we also have a mix of genders, religions, careers, industries, ages, marital status, physical abilities, political leanings, immigrant status, languages, and geographies that we have lived in. And when we worked together, we were really focused on a diversity of ideas. When we launched our new training program, people were amazed that we had never worked together before. They'd never seen such an innovative training program. And it's because we were very intentional about being inclusive and valuing diverse thinking and perspectives that we each brought to the table. So this week, as you meet new people and develop new relationships, Consider sharing a photo or a story in Discord about when you were able to use one of these 4 inclusive leadership skills. Look beyond, value people, value ideas, and lift up. I'll be watching Discord to see the stories that you share of how you're building inclusion on your dance marathon teams. Being an inclusive leader is a lifelong practice. Start early while you're in college, and I guarantee that you will have a head start on leadership, networking, and business skills. Remember to lead with inclusion and value diversity. Thank you so much for attending this workshop for Dance Marathon Leadership Conference, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Sarah, thank you so much for that outstanding session. And I want to also invite you to make sure you take time to watch the awesome TED Talk. I watched Sarah's TED Talk. I think that you'll find that very much something that you're glad that you did. But as you start to reflect over what Sarah talked about and how to lead with inclusivity and value diversity, and as you begin to practice these skills, one of the principles that we follow at Children's Miracle Network is that with all interactions that we do, we always take time to assume the best of each other. And so we just encourage you to apply that as you continue growing your leadership skills. And I'm going to end with, again, once a quote from my favorite poet, Maya Angelou, which is, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Today you learned a lot, and with this learning, you are going to do much better and be amazing leaders, and we're so excited about that. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.